Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming. My name is Kathy Wright, and I am Boost Manager of Strategic Contracting and Procurement. Welcome to the second presentation in our four-part Oasis Plus series, Introduction to Oasis Plus. Our presenter for today is Megan Hand. Megan is a senior contracts and pricing consultant with Boost and helps our clients with proposal pricing volumes, including competitive price or fair and reasonable price analyses, wrap rate development, and overall proposal compliance. She also does all things contracts, from redlining and negotiating NDAs, teaming agreements, and subcontracts, along with everything else that happens day to day in a contract shop. The presentation portion of today's event will last around 45 minutes, and we will conclude with a questions and answers session for the last 15 minutes. Please use the Zoom questions feature to send me your questions as they come up, and I'll pass them to Megan at the end. At the end of the series, we will make all four presentations available through Boost's website. We know you're going to enjoy this presentation, so let's get started. Over to you, Megan.
Thank you so much, Kathy. As Kathy mentioned, my name is Megan Hand, and I'm a senior contracts and pricing consultant here at Boost. And I'm so excited to be here today with you all to discuss proposal, bids, opportunities, and more on Oasis Plus. I truly think Oasis Plus is going to be very significant for all businesses as we go forward. So it's really important to see what we can do to grow our businesses and get awards. Next slide, please, Kathy. Okay, we're going to start with a little bit of the basics on bidding on Oasis Plus. I'm going to talk about some significant changes and some significant parts of Oasis Plus. Oasis is expected to now have about $130 billion in awards, which is about double what the current Oasis contract has. Now, this is just an estimate since there is no ceiling on Oasis Plus, but it's based upon what the trends are and the expansion of the domains in Oasis Plus. That being said, there is a lot more competition. To give you an idea, the current Oasis small business has just over 400 awardees in that pool. The Oasis Plus small business, when it was awarded back in July, although we know this is in protest status, had over 1,300 awardees. So yes, there's expected to be more awards and a lot more funding, but there's going to be a lot more competition, which is why it's even more important to figure out how we can actually review these task orders, see the opportunities, and respond competitively. Another big part is that Oasis Plus has transitioned to GSA eBuy as a task order solicitation platform. We're actually going to go over this a little bit further with a little bit of screenshots so that you can see how GSA eBuy is set up and how you can maneuver it and get through it to make sure you can see what's being released under your master contract. And something I think that it's very important for everyone to know at this point in time is that the ordering contracting officers, they can place solicitations and awards as soon as 7 to 10 days after the master contract was issued. This means that they are happening now. Next slide, please. Okay. Because we were talking a little bit about the comparison between Oasis and Oasis Plus, I want to give everyone a brief overview of when Oasis is ending and when Oasis Plus is beginning. So as you can see, the small business and 8A pools of Oasis are still set to end in mid-December. The unrestricted is set to end in March of next year, so there's been a little bit of extension, which makes sense considering the unrestricted Oasis Plus award has not been made. These are still rolling awards with Oasis Plus, so there is going to be some gaps for those people who might have been on the small business pool or the 8A pool and haven't received an award yet, especially considering the total small business, which has a little asterisk. People received notice of awards back in late July, but it's still in protest status with the expected awards now in December. Next slide, please. Okay. This is one of the important things I think everyone wants to know. It's about the transition from Symphony to GSA eBuy. To be specific, this transitions for task order solicitations. And I want to make sure everyone understands that because if you're still awaiting a master contract award, you're going to still get information from Symphony. That is not transitioning to GSA eBuy. An important part of this is you need to make sure you create a profile under GSA eBuy and assign it to your entity. You can create a profile without doing so, but then you won't be able to see anything. And on top of that, once you assign yourself to the entity, you then need to bring in your master contract number to make sure you can review the opportunities and submit your proposals. And we're going to go on this in a couple of future slides so you can see a little bit more of how you do this. But I want to start with what you are going to see when you log into GSA eBuy. When you log in, you are greeted with a page where you can search for opportunities right away. You can search by keywords. You can then look up if it's with the Army, maybe you work on a specific domains, you want to search only by management. You can do all of that right here to begin with. Next slide, please, Kathy. Once you have that search, so let's say you put in Army, you can then see all of the current solicitations, any of the RFIs, the current status of all the different efforts under your master contract. This is very important because if you're searching multiple different master contracts, maybe you have an unrestricted award, but also you have a total small business award, you need to search those separately on here. When you go and search, you could click on it, see the status, you can see when it opens, you can see what it ends. You can see all of this information here. Next slide, please. On the top of your GSA eBuy, you will then have a few different tabs. The first one is RFQ Finder. Here's where you'd enter by RFQ number. If you don't have an RFQ number, this is not by keywords, so it will not give you the same search results. But this might be useful if maybe you received an email and your email says that here's this RFQ number, you're interested in it, and you want to now see more, search it from here. Next slide, please. Next one is My Quotes. So My Quotes will have all this information right here. You can see everything that you have done. You can see all of your quotes that you have submitted, what the status is on it, and have this information just sitting here for you. This might be increased as we go by. Right now, GSA has said they're trying to increase the functionality to make sure that some details of your awards are included in GSA eBuy, and we expect that this might change. Next slide, please. All right, your next tab is your RFQs. This is probably one of the more important ones you'll be in. It's really where you're going to respond to things, where you're going to see what you've responded to. You're going to upload your responses. You can also put interested. If you're reviewing an RFQ and your RFQ, you're like, oh, maybe I want to see where this is going. It's in the RFI stage. You can click your interested to make sure that you get updates on here. You can also put that you're going to do a no quote on it if you're trying to see your status on everything. And this is where you'll actually go in and upload your solicitation. You can save it as a draft and then you could submit it here. I do want to note that when we're saying upload it and creating your solicitation in GSA eBuy, it does not mean that you have to go and write up your entire narrative in eBuy. Yes, there will be certain fields to fill out, but you will be usually just attaching your price volume or technical volume or what other volumes that your contracting officer is asking for. Next slide, please. And the last one we're going to go over is your profile. And I want to make sure that everyone truly understands what's in your profile. First, you can see in the green box on the top left is where you can add and manage your contracts. As Nick mentioned in his previous webinar, and we kind of discussed already, GSA eBuy, you search by your master contract, which means you can have multiple here. You have to go in and add in your master contract number so that you can receive and see all the solicitations associated with it. So this is where you can do it. Also here is where you can upload or you can modify the people who have access to GSA eBuy. This should not just be limited to those contract manager and your program manager that's assigned in Oasis Plus. This can be anyone in your company, whether it's business development, HR, contracts, of course, anyone who you think might need access to GSA eBuy at any point in time. They can turn off email notifications. So maybe if you want your proposal manager in there, but they don't need to receive all the notifications because your business development person does, they could turn that off pretty easily. But having people in here is going to be very important since, as we're going to discuss, a lot of Oasis Plus solicitations have such a quick turnaround time, and all the functions of Oasis Plus task order solicitations will be in GSA eBuy. Right. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Megan. Before we go to the next slide, we're going to break here for a quick poll. Our first poll of the day is just launched, and our growth, our business development team markets our contract vehicles to ordering contracting officers frequently, sometimes when we need to fill in the gaps, or never. And we would like to talk more about how we can go about doing this. And I see lots of people responding. It looks like about a 50-50 break between frequently and sometimes, but the majority of you would like more information on how you can do this. So we will definitely send out additional information and reach out to those of you who responded to the poll in this way to kind of give you some pointers. And Megan's actually going to cover the delegation of procurement authority for contracting officers a little bit later in this deck. So that might give you some advice on that as well. Thanks to everyone for answering. And now let's get back to the presentation.
All right. And thank you, Kathy. I appreciate all the polls and everyone responding. It's really wonderful. And just as a reminder, if anyone has questions, please put it in the Q&A box and we will respond to that at the end here. All right. So now that we've kind of gone through the contractor functions in GSA eBuy, I want to discuss what the government's using GSA eBuy. People who have Oasis might remember that sometimes you receive email solicitations. Some things could even be on GSA eBuy, some was on Symphony. It was really all over the place. Come Oasis Plus, with the plus, right? They want to make everything bigger and better. So now GSA eBuy has been mandated as a way to do all the solicitation process. So to begin with, the government is going to be using GSA eBuy to review vendor information, your core capabilities, your company, your master contracts. So please make sure your profile is up to date and your POCs are up to date. They will be using it to create and release RFIs and conduct market research. So again, when everything's updated, they can easily see everyone who has a contract, what they've been awarded so far, all of their information, and they can use it to decide what master contract their opportunity should be under. Just for a little bit of background in deciding that, a lot of contracting officers will be determining that based upon how many people, if there's two or more, that has either a small business designation, like a woman-owned small business, to see if they could go into that master contract in that domain. So this is why please be an eBuy, make sure things are up to date so that the government can use that to decide how they should be soliciting their task order. They will be creating and releasing RFQs in eBuy, conducting questions and answers, doing any sort of RFQ amendments. You'll also be sending your vendor proposal, so they'll be receiving it and evaluating it all in eBuy and using it to report award information. As I briefly mentioned before, GSA is expecting to increase the award information functionality. What that looks like yet, we're not exactly sure, but we should be seeing that in the upcoming months. So you will even see more data and more information in GSA eBuy. The other thing I want to mention, and this isn't necessarily in GSA eBuy, but is a service from GSA. GSA can also create scope reviews. So if, let's say they have a contract, they're thinking, oh, it could be on Oasis Plus, we're doing some market research and it looks like there's vendors, but we're not sure if it fits, they can also go to GSA and get that scope review. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. All right. So one of the things I think it's important to know is really what is the scope of Oasis Plus task order solicitations? What can you see and what can you not see? What is allowed is any contract type, whether that be firm fixed price, time and materials, labor hour, cost. Although, of course, cost would mean that you need to have an adequate accounting system, which would be done at the contracting officer level, and any hybrid contracts. This also means you might see incentive type contracts, so a fixed price incentive or a cost type incentive contract. The effort can take place either inside or outside the continental United States, so CONUS or OCONUS, so it does not matter the location. It can be both commercial or non-commercial. It can include certain acts like the service contract labor standards. So you might receive wage determinations and further information at your task order solicitation level. Any of the task order solicitations can include options and various CLIN structures. That's to try to make it as creative as possible to meet the need of the agencies. It can also be both classified and non-classified. I do have a little asterisk here on the classified because this is one of the few scenarios where you would not be using GSA eBuy. In this case, if it's a classification level where the details should not be public, you would instead be receiving an email directly from the contracting officer, and there is a specific Oasis Plus email that would be CC'd to let Oasis Plus know that this award's being made, but without making sure this information is being released publicly. What is not allowed? You cannot find IDIQs or BPAs under Oasis Plus. And that's why they're trying to be as flexible with the CLIN structure and the options, because you can't have a BPA or an IDIQ. You also cannot have inherently governmental functions or any part of FAR Part 36, which is the construction and architect engineer contracts. You can also not have any efforts under NAICS code other than those listed under a domain. So as you might know, and you can see this in your master contract or also by going to the Oasis Plus homepage, most domains have 8 to sometimes 30 NAICS codes under them. For example, the management and advisory domain has 8 NAICS codes, which means all efforts under that domain can only fall in those 8 NAICS codes. Outside of it means that probably is not within scope. And as we've mentioned, and as most people know, information technology cannot be the sole purpose of an Oasis Plus task order solicitation. Although it can be, an extra part of it, there can be some aspects of it. It just cannot be the sole purpose of it. Next slide, please. Okay. So now what happens when you get a task order solicitation release? What does it look like? As we briefly mentioned, it will be released by a master contract, domain, and NAICS code. So all 3 of those areas. You might then see a women-owned small business master contract under the management and advisory domain under NAICS code 541611. It has to be at that level. Oasis Plus and any contracting officer cannot issue it under multiple different domains, under multiple different master contracts at once. So whatever it's been decided upon is where it's going to be released, and it's only those people who can bid on it. It must be released by the contracting officer with a delegation of procurement authority. Nick mentioned this briefly in his webinar. This is fairly easy to obtain. It requires a training in reading it, but until the contracting officer has that, they cannot go into the system and see all of the information like your master contract ceiling rates, and they cannot solicit any task order solicitation. However, contracting officers still can, without a delegation of procurement authority, still conduct market research. So if you're at the point where maybe your customer, your contracting officer is not familiar with Oasis Plus, doesn't know how they feel about it, you can still let them know they can go and conduct market research without going through the training, without going through the entire process. And one of the most important things is once it's been released under a specific master contract, that effort cannot be further set aside. So you cannot have an unrestricted master contract effort, but then set it aside to women-owned small businesses. You cannot have everyone in hub zones and then set it aside to also women-owned small businesses. So you just have this very specific segment. That is not allowed. So all the efforts released under a specific master contract are going out to all those awardees, which in case, as we mentioned, could be up to thousands. It can, however, be limited to, can limit fair opportunity based upon the FAR part. And this is in the case of, let's say there's urgency, you can still limit it, do a sole source award. It can be done if there is only one awardee. So who can actually provide the services? You have XYZ capability, no one else does. The contracting officer can make that sole source determination and then give you the award. In this case as well, you'd probably receive your award directly from the contracting officer instead of through GSA eBuy. The biggest benefit, and most people are very excited to use Oasis Plus, and another reason to let your customers who might not be familiar with Oasis Plus know, is that all task order solicitations are solicited in accordance with FAR 16505 ordering. This comes with a lot of benefits of using these ordering procedures. There is no minimum solicitation period. So there is not that 30-day requirement where, maybe it's 30 days for solicitation and then it takes 6 months to award it. That's not going to happen. In fact, a lot of Oasis task orders, which we expect for the same for Oasis Plus, sometimes only have 2-week turnarounds. They're very quick efforts, quick to be solicited, quick to be awarded. Synopsis is not required. For those of you who may not be familiar with what that means, it's any time that an effort is published on SAM.gov to the entire community. That is not required here. So that is why GSA e-buy is so important, because that's the only area you would be seeing these solicitations. And a formal source selection evaluation board is also not required. There is very few procedures into actually evaluate proposals here. So it can be a lot less time than if it was under a FAR Part 15, contract by negotiation procurement. And you do not similarly need to conduct discussions. So again, Oasis Plus is really trying to streamline the entire process to make it easier for both contractors and also for the government. Next slide, please. A couple other things we want to know about task order solicitations when you receive it. It may require re-representation of your size status, which as we get into the 5th year or 10 years from now, might change for a lot of folks as you go from a small business to a large, or maybe you size out of some of your other designations. This is very specific though to your contracting officer in your agency. To give you an idea for Oasis at least, and we expect the same for Oasis Plus, I have seen dozens of Oasis proposals, and I've only seen one which had a re-representation of size status. And in that one, people did ask in the Q&A whether the government would reconsider. So if you're in the boat where maybe now you're a large, you can always ask that in the Q&A during that phase and say, based upon Oasis Plus, this is not a requirement. Would the government consider removing a re-representation of size status? As we briefly mentioned, the response times are agency and contracting officer specific, so please be prepared. Please keep reviewing these on a very regular basis. When some are only a week or two long, you don't have time to just wait every week or 2 weeks to review to see if there's solicitations out there. Task orders can be up to 5 years and 6 months after the master contract expires. So that 6 months is that option to extend that's on most contracts. So it's normal 5-year base plus 4. You'll see on task orders. That also means that if we are in year 5 of our master contract, maybe our option hasn't been extended yet, we can still receive a task order for 5 years. Big part in, I know most of you, if you're on Oasis Plus now, you had to go through the exercise of pricing out those 20 labor categories and creating a ceiling price. Those are the 20 standardized Oasis Plus labor categories, but they do not have to be used. The government can also decide to use their own labor categories. And in those cases, they might ask you to map them. They might say, all right, we really want a SWE level 1, and they have a level 1, and you map it to one of the Oasis Plus standard levels, which is the junior, the journeyman, the senior, and the SME. They may ask for that. They can also, though, ask for a contractor-derived response. And please, again, these are things that you can always let your contracting officer and your customer know. If they don't think that maybe the Oasis labor categories are a right fit, they can ask you for your own and your solution. And another very important part is that these include agency-specific clauses. So they're not going to all be the same. And you really focus on those agency-specific clauses. For example, and I've seen these a lot recently, you might find one specific to AI, artificial intelligence. Some agencies are coming out and saying that it's not allowed. Some agencies are coming out and saying you have to give XYZ notice, or you have to request a written approval for use of the AI. So every task order solicitation is going to be a little bit different. And these are the areas I'd suggest paying a lot more attention to. I also, on the right, I included a little snippet of what a task order solicitation may look like. GSA put out a task order solicitation template for all Oasis Plus contracting officers to utilize. It covers a lot of the basic information like the master contract, the domain, the NAICS code, whether it's commercial, non-commercial, things we've discussed already. However, contracting officers do not have to use it. So just keep in mind it has to still keep that information there. It does not have to look like this all the time. Next slide, please.
Okay, well, thank you, Megan. Before we go to the next slide, we have our second polling question. It's coming at you now. When we pursue a task order opportunity with a quick turnaround, our company has tons of resources. We are good to go. We generally don't have to make any price assumptions, and we don't worry about compliance. And then we have the middle of the road where, we make a few price consumptions, and I think we do a good job with compliance, but I don't know, sometimes your subcontractors don't give you the data calls you need, or you're not finished negotiating when the turnaround's quick. So that sort of introduces a little risk. Or it's more of a Hail Mary. We do the best we can on a short turnaround and figure we probably don't have anything to lose. And as long as we try, maybe there'll be amendments or things that expand the time so that we can get some corrections made. And so what I'm seeing in the results, it's really close. We're almost 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3, with a few extras saying that you're properly resourced and that you have the people you need to make it work, even in a tight turnaround. Awesome. This is great information. Thank you, everyone, for participating in the poll. And Megan, back over to you.
Thank you, Kathy. And thank you all for helping answer the poll. It really helps us be able to tailor our services to the needs of you all. Now we're going to get into my favorite topic, which is pricing. So I could talk a couple of hours on here, but I'm not going to. Please reach out to us if you want to discuss further. But pricing on Oasis Plus. A big thing for Oasis Plus is prices are determined fair and reasonable at the task order level. So even though you went through the entire exercise of doing ceiling rates against those 20 labor categories when you bid on Oasis Plus to begin with, it doesn't matter. You still need to go through and have prices determined fair and reasonable. The great news is usually the easiest and best way to do that is by competition. In competition, just we have a couple of FAR clauses in there. You can see if they're expecting adequate price competition based upon those inclusion of those clauses, but also how it's solicited to you. If there is not adequate price competition, then those ceiling rates that we discussed, those 20, they will be used. And you have to make sure that you do not exceed those ceiling rates. Usually those are pretty high, but I want to make sure everyone keeps those in mind, that those then have to be maintained. Another important aspect of those ceiling rates, when they were developed, I'm not sure if people noticed this, they were developed at a 4.15% escalation for those 15 years that you had to price it at. That was based upon the last 3 years average at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, Employment Cost Index data. I have a little snippet of the data in general. If people have not used it yet, I think it's a great tool to see really where escalation's at, and it's a great reason to justify any escalation rates. So at the time of Oasis Plus, it was at 4.15% for the last 3 years. So that's what was used. However, as Oasis Plus is going on, those ceiling rates will be adjusted based upon the last 3 years data. This is good news because this means if in year 10, the last 3 years we had 7% escalation, which I hope we don't, but it could happen, the government will actually adjust your ceiling rates accordingly. So they'll take into consideration that huge increase that everyone is seeing in the labor market. This is especially positive because as people might know from those who might have been on Polaris or other big GWAGs, this wasn't always the case. And when they were bid at 2% rates and they were done in 2015 and then 2021, 2022 happened and all the rates increased to 5%, it was very hard to staff contracts. So Oasis has taken that into consideration. The biggest other difference from pricing Oasis Plus proposals versus any other proposals is that it includes a contract access fee, which is referred to as the CAF. This is very similar to IFF for those who use GSA Mass, and is the fee that GSA takes in for doing work and administering the Oasis Plus contract. It is currently at 0.15%, which is different from those who used Oasis. and is applied at the total cost level. So that means all your ODCs, all your travel, indirect rates, profit, labor, whatever it may be, CAF is applied to it. And it has to be a separate line item. I really want to make sure everyone understands this, as this is one of the areas I usually see the most errors from the contracting officers on. I will receive solicitations and they'll have a pricing spreadsheet, and CAF will only be applied to labor, or CAF will be missing entirely. CAF cannot be negotiated between agencies or between the vendor, so it really has to be maintained. And like most things, it's a lot easier in the Q&A phase or the solicitation phase to make those adjustments, let the contracting officer know that there's an error, versus figuring it out come award time and having to issue a modification, see if there's additional funding, and making those changes to your CLIN structure. Next slide, please. Other proposal considerations. The great thing about Oasis Plus is that any source selection methods can be used. This can include the best value trade-off. So that's where the government decides that price is truly not the most important option. Maybe it's a technical capability, maybe it's something specific, or it can even be your ability to have a great past performance, or it could be lowest price technically acceptable. So, as long as you're technically acceptable, you meet these 5 criteria, you can receive it if your price is low enough. It can also be anywhere in between. Streamlined processes are highly, highly encouraged during Oasis Plus. This includes oral presentations. For example, your contracting officer can say, and again, these are just ideas too, if you're speaking to a contracting officer who might not fully understand Oasis Plus because they're new at it, it's a lot of training, there's hundreds of pages on it, let them know this. It can include oral presentations instead of doing a technical narrative. Right? Anything that can be done to help streamline the process for both the government and vendors and reduce time and cost. That has been one of the main objectives of Oasis Plus. The contracting officer, likewise, again, to try to streamline it, has very broad discretion of which evaluation factors to include. Whether, normally you might see past performance, price, technical, management, as well as the scoring system. So a lot of people are very familiar with the adjectival ratings for, let's say, your technical. It does not have to be the case under Oasis Plus. The contracting officer can utilize almost any ideas and any sort of hybrid method of source selection as long as they can justify it and they make sure in their solicitation they tell you what it is, right? So you have your instructions and your evaluation criteria there. This is again why Oasis Plus is so different, because it's going to be very tailored to the needs of the individual agency, contracting officer, and effort. Another area I want to highlight, and I briefly did before, is that task orders will include specific terms and conditions, so please pay attention to them. But the master contract terms and conditions do take precedence. I'm going to highlight this on a specific example of why this is important. So in your master contract, if you are a small business designation, you will have an area on limitations of subcontracting. And it specifically says for limitations of subcontracting, what you cannot exceed, it's that normal 50% rule. And that if you do exceed it, let's say you subcontract 75% of your work where you're only supposed to subcontract less than 50%, you can go into dormant status. Even if your task order solicitation does not say that, the master contract does supersede and it will take effect. So please, on some of these, keep in mind what your master contract says. I normally suggest that you do a review of your master contract. And this is something we can help you with too, if you haven't done this before, to take out some of those high level requirements and compliance areas so you can make sure you're still taking those into consideration, even if your task order solicitation does not mention them. Next slide, please. Okay. And now we talked about this briefly at the beginning. A lot of people are interested in how to market your Oasis Plus contract. So we've already discussed GSA eBuy, getting in there, what your task orders look like, and how to do your proposals. But sometimes the biggest issue is how do we actually get some of our efforts onto Oasis Plus so we can bid? One of the suggestions, and this is by GSA as well, is to create brochures with Oasis Plus as one of your solutions. You can include this to also include the NAICS code of your specific domain, include your domain levels, and your contract number. These are suggested to hand out on any sort of industry days, especially where these requirements are unsure whether or not they're going Oasis Plus or not, or any sort of conference or something where you're going to be present with government customers, but other team members as well. You can also recommend Oasis Plus as a solution when you get any sources sought or RFIs through SAM.gov. As we mentioned, Oasis Plus does not have to be synopsized, so they do not have to go on SAM.gov. So if you see an RFI on there, the contracting officer might not think that this can possibly go on Oasis Plus. Let them know that in your solution. Let them know that you are a woman-owned small business or whatever designation, or just unrestricted, and that you suggest Oasis Plus because it would clearly fit under a master contract or even a domain. You can also, and I didn't put this here because it's no longer a requirement, you can always put Oasis Plus on your website. That was a requirement under Oasis and is no longer, but any of these ways are possibilities to broadcast Oasis Plus. And GSA has been really encouraging vendors to do so. They do reserve the discretion to say no, maybe they don't approve of a brochure, but overarching, they want Oasis Plus to be used. It's in the government's best interest. Another thing you can do is network. So this can be networking by reviewing the contractor list on SAM.gov currently, because all the awardee lists are on there right now, but also on GSA eBuy in the future. In the future, GSA eBuy will be keeping a master contract list of all different vendors. It will be updated on a weekly basis. So that will take into consideration all these new awardees as we're going into rolling awards, or when we're doing continuing on ramping, all of those ones as well. And you can see the different partners that might be able to work with you on certain efforts under certain master contracts in certain domains. So please do so. Next slide, please. Okay. So now that we've discussed marketing, proposals, task orders, eBuy, I want to talk about some high-level next steps. As I've said previously, make sure your GSA eBuy accounts are up to date. Make sure if you have your master contract number already, you add it in there so you can have it ready as task order solicitations come out. Continue to market your Oasis Plus master contract. This is to everyone's benefit, both the government and yourselves, as well as other competitors too. And then, of course, stay tuned for future webinars that we're having on reporting, post-award management, and on ramping. And if there are any questions besides the Q&A phase we'll get to in a minute, any specific ones related to your specific company or specific to how your accounts are set up, reach out to us for any questions. Next slide, please.
Okay, well, before we go to the questions and answers, I have one last poll for you. Launching that now. Your biggest challenge when you're preparing proposals, bandwidth in the growth team to respond to every opportunity you want to pursue, market intelligence. Are my prices competitive or am I leaving money on the table, which none of us want to do? Do we understand all of the FAR and agency clauses so that we can cover that risk and make sure when we go to execute, we've got the cost of compliance covered, finding qualified teaming partners so my proposal's super strong and I have the scope of work backed up with solid past performance. And I see results coming in. So the most popular answer is market intel, how to know if your offer's competitive or, if it's too low and you're leaving money on the table. Nobody wants to do that. Also, the second most popular is bandwidth. There's a tricky balance there when you say, Megan, by having a growth team big enough to respond to everything you want to bid on, but not having so many people on the growth team that your BMP cost is too high. Yeah.
Yeah.
All
And just,
right.
to add to that, Kathy, I definitely think that's one of the reasons why we have a lot of clients that use Boost is because there are some big opportunities. People just don't have the bandwidth, and that's why we're here to help.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Well, we're going to move to the question and answer section. See, first question, Megan, if the government cannot further set aside, but they can limit fair opportunity. Can you give an example of how they may do that?
Yeah, of course. So I think the biggest one a lot of people use, and this sometimes happens at the end of the fiscal year, is urgency requirements. The government wants to get something done right away. It's going to go on contract. It needs to go on contract, and any sort of competition would limit that. Another area is if there's a logical follow-on, for example. So let's say you're working on an effort for 5 years, that second effort is really so closely intertwined that it makes sense for you to do it. The government could limit it based upon that as well and award you a sole source contract.
Okay, good answer. Let's see, we have another one. If we already have an existing GSA eBuy account, do we need to create a new account or can we add the Oasis Plus contract through the existing account?
Yes, no, and that's a great question. So you can add the GSA master contract through the existing account, and that should be able to be done through your profile. That was one of the slides when you receive them, you can see ask for you to add the master contract. People might need to create additional accounts if they don't have one already, though.
Okay, and more on eBay. The question is, I have added additional emails under my eBuy profile to receive notifications, but not everyone's receiving those notifications. They've signed up for mobile alerts and they still don't get them. Have you heard about this, Megan, or know of others that have this issue?
I mean, GSA eBuy is notorious for having, certain technical issues for it. I would make sure first that everyone's under it for the certain master contracts, right? Because, master contracts are divided. So if they're not under that category, they might not be receiving emails for this. If not, GSA does have a great help desk. You can always go and ask them for support there.
That's a great answer. Here's another one. Do When the task orders come through in eBuy, do the master contract holders have to no bid or say they're not interested? Do they have to respond to every opportunity?
No, they do not have to respond to every opportunity. You might want to just so you're tracking what you're bidding on and what you're not, as it will start categorizing it in eBuy. So you're not just thinking there's, 10 opportunities out there that you have not reviewed. So it's more for your tracking purposes. And it does let the government know what they should be expecting. So in terms of their market research, but it's not a requirement.
Got it. So on the BLS data and the labor cost adjustments, does the government also adjust down if the economy gets better and or if labor prices drop for whatever reason? Does it go both ways?
Yes, let's hope that it gets a little bit better. It was, GSA Oasis did come out when it was about 415% over the last 3 years, which is incredibly high. So I do expect that those ceiling rates might go down. I mean, I think we're all hoping they're going to go down. The only caveat I will make for that is if you have an awarded contract on a sole source basis, whatever your ceiling rates were upon award, those will not change throughout the life of your task order. They're just going to change at the master contract level.
Got it. Got it. Is it too soon? Are there opportunities, do you think, out on Oasis Plus now? Because one of our attendees says they're not seeing anything in GSA eBuy.
Yeah, and there are some opportunities out there. There are not many, right? And please keep in mind too, like you can't search all Oasis opportunities for all domains and all master contracts. So you're only seeing a very specific subset. And I think a lot of contracting officers have been trying, if possible, to award things under Oasis just because they had everything written for Oasis. That was their kind of goal. So I expect there will be more as Oasis truly dies down and is terminated in December.
Got it. Got it. Let's see. I am having an issue adding our woman-owned small business contract to our already established eBuy account via the add contract option in the profile. Is there a step missing before the contract number can be added?
If you have an eBuy account and you have your entity registered, that should be the next step. On like these types of scenarios, if you want to reach out to us separately, we can always see if there's something missing in there. Sometimes it's just how the contract number is written on there is it's a little bit finicky.
Yeah. Understand. Um, a couple of these, Megan, you spoke to, but maybe you'll want to go in a little bit more detail. Will GSA restrict RFPs to the single restricted groups or multiple? I think what you said is it'll only be like small woman owned or small SDV, right? Or small, but I don't think they'll mix those, will they?
Correct. And that's, I think, something people really need to keep in mind, especially because the six master contracts is a lot different than how Oasis did their job. If it's released under the woman-owned small business master contract, that's it. That's as further as it is designated, but it also means that people in the total small business can't go for that effort, right? It is going to be very specific to your master contract. And as I mentioned, it cannot be released under multiple master contracts at the same time. And this is why it's just so important during those RFI phase and during the marketing to let contracting officers know that you can do the work to try to get it to your specific master contract.
Great. Hey, can you revisit the standardized labor categories? We sort of have a generic question, and I know you covered it, but would you talk about that some more?
Yeah, so as part of your Plus proposal, so of course for most people this was back over a year ago, it's been a while. There was 20 different labor categories. And these were pulled from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They looked at specific categories and they included ones like engineers, all management, human resources, very high level labor categories. With those labor categories, Oasis also gave very specific levels. So you had a junior level, you had a journeyman level, a senior level, and a SME level. So those are just on levels of experience, and those would be considered the Oasis standard labor categories if you have it mapping to those. And for further information, each one of those has a specific BLS identification number where you could even go in, and this is part of your master contract, and see the bigger description on what that labor category entails.
That's great advice. Thank you. Is there an update on when GSA intends to award the Oasis Plus unrestricted master contracts?
And I looked this up yesterday to see if there's any further news. There's still not any news on it. It's still expected this quarter, right? I believe because the unrestricted Oasis contract is not ending till March, it's not as big of a priority, unfortunately, because there's actually an overlap right here.
Got it. And when that does come out, will small businesses be able to bid on task orders under the unrestricted master contracts?
If they have an unrestricted master contract, which small businesses can be eligible for. So there are some small businesses who have an unrestricted master contract, the total small business master contract, and their designation as well. So you could have, 4 or 5 master contracts to be as competitive as possible.
Got it. What's the difference between eBuy and Fed Connect?
So eBuy is going to be the source where really all the solicitations are. So this is the RFI, the RFQ, all of that portion of it. Fed Connect does not have that capability on there. So although it's related to GSA and there's information on there, it's not going to be where you're going to actually see your amendments, your solicitations, and upload your task orders.
Got it. Let's see what happens within the system when you respond not interested to an RFI or sources sought. Does that shut you out from seeing the solicitation?
No, and that's a wonderful question on that. It will not shut you out for it in future solicitations because, as I mentioned, when a contracting officer decides something's going to a certain master contract, it has to go to everyone under that master contract. So even if you said no to 5 beforehand, you'll still get access to it. It can, however, it could impact the government's determination of market research if they're looking at it and thinking, okay, no, this all these businesses cannot do it. They don't want to do it. They might take that into consideration for any similar procurement of maybe we should switch the master contract or switch something else.
Got it. Let's see. We have another one. I have added our GSA account through our eBuy account. Will that automatically add our POCs to Oasis Plus to get e-buy notifications?
I would suggest making sure all of your POCs have that correct category. So, the way eBuy works is you have specific categories for your specific contracts, and those can be changed. So, make sure they're under those ones as well.
Got it. Got it. So, Megan, we have seen IDIQs out there that prohibit protests at the task order level. Is that true for Oasis Plus as well?
It is not true. So there can be protests at the task order level. However, these are going to be very specific, right? These are not just general protests on how thing is done. There is specific requirements for your protest, and they would be handled by the contracting officer and the agency, not by a GSA.
Got it. And Megan, you have cleared out the whole queue of questions. That was amazing, like a lightning round. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for the information you shared with us today. For our
Of course.
listeners, we are going to have the slides available after we get through the entire series. You'll be able to find links to them through the Boost website. We want to thank everyone for coming, and we look forward to seeing you at next Wednesday's Oasis Plus seminar at the same time. This will be the third in our series, Reporting and Deliverables Compliance. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you all.